We covered A24's first 20 films in the last video. Now it's time for part 2, 25 more films. From 2013 to 2025. Everything Hollywood didn't have the courage to make. Let's get into it. Scarlett Johansson's entire glamorous Hollywood image flipped upside down. We see the world through the eyes of an alien entity drifting through the misty streets of Scotland, luring lonely men into a van. Blazer placed hidden cameras on the streets. Most of the men who got in had no idea who was sitting across from them. This raw reality, combined with those abstract scenes where victims sink into black liquid, creates a complete visual nightmare. A sci-fi experiment that conveys what it means to inhabit a human body through an alien's eyes, with almost no dialogue, just an unsettling string score. How rational does it sound to explore the void left by death using a bedsheet with 2 eye holes? Lowry takes this absurd image and turns it into a throat-knotting meditation on time and grief. Our ghost doesn't rattle chains or jump out of closets. It simply watches, in silence, as its wife grieves, cleans, moves out, and skyscrapers rise in place of their old home. Rooney Mara eating an entire pie alone on the kitchen floor, crying in a single unbroken take, the sorrow of everything left behind, conveyed without a single word. Ethan Hawke's collapsed, faith-broken face alone proves how heavy a burden it is to search for God in the modern world. A small church pastor, after a long philosophical conversation with a suicidal environmentalist, is forced to confront the darkness inside himself. Shot with almost no camera movement, fixed frames, a solitary confinement cell. Rather than a comforting sermon, it leaves the viewer face to face with a shocking final scene where faith and madness finally collide. Lanthimos hurls an ancient Greek tragedy into the modern medical world, taking great pleasure in playing with the audience's nerves. No monster, no killer, just the cold, geometric story of a surgeon who must sacrifice one of his family members to pay for a fatal mistake. Nobody screams or cries, everyone speaks in a flat, robotic tone, and this deadness makes the blood-chilling violence lurking inside the story so much harder to bear. Bo Burnham captures the hell of adolescence not through grand drama, but through raw, hyper-realistic moments of shame reflected off a phone screen. 13-year-old Kayla has no friends at school but locks herself in a room uploading motivational videos nobody watches. The contrast between social media's fake perfection and the awkward, lonely moments of real life triggers the audience's most buried memories. A story that captures a girl's struggle to fit into her own body, both aching and quietly funny. An entire family constructs a massive lie to keep a terminal cancer diagnosis from their grandmother. The film brings the Chinese philosophy of carrying the burden in place of your loved ones face to face with Western ideals of honesty. The cheerful masks at the dinner table versus the tears shed in secret in the kitchen, that contrast is the film's real engine of humor and grief. Facing death and farewell without melodrama, with the warmth of an absurd family dinner. In the middle of Arkansas, inside a trailer. Hot, suffocating, an American dream that could collapse at any moment. A man digs into the soil planting Korean vegetables while home takes root on its own, like the minaret plant by the creek. The film doesn't lecture about immigration. It throws at us a cursing, card-playing, wildly unconventional grandmother. Without grand statements, working only through the smell of earth and a family's stubborn insistence on holding on, a quietly clear story. A man steps off a bus into the dusty Texas heartland, bags in hand, not a cent to his name. A washed-up former adult film actor. Rather than making us pity or judge him, Baker places his endless survival energy and manipulation on the table with pitch-black humor. Big promises, false hope, the graveyard of the American dream, all murmuring in the background television. The most energetic yet equally unsettling crime comedy on the list, powered by a restless, raw performance. A radio journalist on black and white New York streets, holding an enormous microphone, asking children questions about the future. As he drifts from city to city caring for his unusual nephew, the voices of those strangers become the film's real heart. No big family arguments, no cliched tears, just listening, the pure anxieties of a child's world, and an adult learning to hold on to life again at a child's pace. A minimal, quietly healing road drama. A half-human, half-lamb baby is born, and a couple wraps it in a blanket and puts it to bed without a second thought. Set in the isolated, foggy mountains of Iceland, the film places this strange absurdity in front of us with deadpan seriousness. The characters barely speak, all tension radiates from the eyes of the sheep watching through the window. A film that shows how the desire to possess can transform a person into something monstrous, without any creature jumping out at you. In a mansion, the power goes out in the middle of a storm, and a murder mystery game turns into a bloodbath when a body is found. Not a classic slasher, a paranoia spiral within a friend group that labels each other toxic and gaslighting at every turn. Characters searching for the killer with phone flashlights are really confronting each other's dirty secrets. That tragicomic final shot lands a raw slap in the face about modern communication failure. Can going to your mother's house become a 3-hour descent into hell? Astor uses A24's budget like a stick of dynamite, blowing up every logic rule of mainstream cinema. While fleeing zombie-like killers in the streets, we suddenly find ourselves inside an animated forest theater, then hurled into the monstrously transformed family secrets in the attic. One of the most audacious delirium sessions in cinema history, one that never gives the audience a moment's peace. Behind the glittering wrestling rings of the 1980s lies a cursed family tragedy. A body transformed to an almost unrecognizable mass of muscle gradually reveals itself as the shelter of a small boy crushed beneath his father's narcissistic ambitions. Brothers driven one by one toward death, like leaves falling from a tree. The father's obsession with the strongest man becomes an invisible executioner. One of the most devastating biographical dramas of recent years. You wake up to discover millions of strangers are dreaming about you, but you're just standing there, doing nothing. Nicolas Cage plays a balding, pot-bellied professor whose greatest ambition is to be recognized academically. Rather than a superhero story, Borgley turns this into a pitch-black critique of cancel culture and fame obsession. When his passive dream presence evolves into nightmares, his fake popularity turns overnight into hatred. A sharp satire about how societal hysteria drives a person step by step into madness. The commandant of Auschwitz's children splash in the garden pool while black smoke rises beyond the gray wall behind them. Glazer never shows us the familiar bloody scenes. Instead, he places the bureaucratic, mundane face of evil right under our noses. The camera watches the family with security camera coldness. The real horror is in the sound design. Industrial furnace drones, distant gunshots, screams, all just background noise to this family's picnic joy. Atrocity told not through a monster, but through the comfort zone of people who built a paradise by ignoring the massacre next door. The smell of sweat, steroid injections, rusty weights. After the quiet religious madness of her debut, Glass shifts into a completely different gear. The instant attraction between a reclusive gym owner and an ambitious bodybuilder passing through town invites blood from the very first second. A queer aesthetic reframes the familiar masculine revenge story, while Ed Harris's psychopathic crime lord amplifies the unsettling rural paranoia. The most adrenaline-fueled, audacious crime romance on the list. Without a performance that speaks through the eyes and radiates dignity from every cell, this story could very easily have become a Hollywood inspirational lecture. Set behind bars, the film draws its power not from guard brutality or escape plans, but from Shakespearean monologues. Real former inmates alongside professional actors, that raw, documentary-like authenticity puts in front of us not glamorous stages, but men playing kings between damp walls, with childlike excitement. How art and friendship help a person breathe again even in the darkest place. Brendan Fraser isn't playing a character here. He's carrying the weight of a man trapped inside a 600-pound body, slowly surrendering himself to death. Charlie hasn't left his apartment in years. He eats, teaches online classes, and doesn't even ask the students on the other side of the screen to turn their cameras on. But when the daughter he hasn't seen in a long time shows up at his door, he realizes he has 1 week to be honest one last time. Aronofsky traps us inside those 4 walls and doesn't let us out. Few scenes, one location, heavy dialogue. But Fraser's eyes, carrying guilt, love, regret, and surrender all at once, are enough to fill the room. Fraser returned to Hollywood with this role. He had been outside the industry for years, and that's exactly why that Oscar night felt so different. Not just an award ceremony, a man's return. The Whale isn't about how a person destroys themselves. It's about how someone already destroyed can still love. The story that brought Adrian Brody's second Oscar, a Hungarian Bauhaus architect who survived the Holocaust and immigrated to the U.S. in 1947, 30 years of his life under the microscope. His path crossing with a wealthy, artistically bankrupt businessman becomes a dark anatomy of how capitalism tries to own the artist as property. Shot in VistaVision, saluting the genius labor of immigrants who built America while showing, without a single word of editorializing, how the system discards that labor. A brutalist monument. The moment Linda's fuse blows. Constantly beeping medical devices, a ceiling on the verge of collapse, the sacred mask of motherhood torn completely away. A psychotherapist by day, a wreck alone with her sick daughter by night. A performance so raw it feels like the most claustrophobic horror film ever made about parenthood. The absurd presence of Conan O'Brien and A$AP Rocky injects an unsettling dark humor into this spiral of loneliness and madness. What do you do when a cheap late-night TV show starts feeling more real than your actual life? Schoonbrunn opens with familiar suburban loneliness and slowly transforms the story into a metaphor for identity confusion and a trans awakening. As the dim neon glow of cathode ray tubes washes over the walls, two teenagers' grip on reality begins to crack. A nerve-shredding visual poem about what happens when a person spends a lifetime running from their own truth. No artificial music, no fake heroism, just bullet sounds, cracking concrete, and the raw breathing of soldiers caught in an ambush. Garland and a real Iraq War veteran reconstruct 96 minutes of terror in a Ramadi building in real time, in strict fidelity to actual memories. Soldiers never become action figures, they're ordinary kids going into shock within seconds. War felt not as a grand strategy game, but as the paranoid deafness of a bomb going off inside a closed room. Chalamet's romantic lead image completely dismantled, hair slicked back, thin mustache, wild 1950s New York comedy drama. Safdie draws inspiration from legendary table tennis champion Marty but makes no cliched success story. The hustling and underground world behind gleaming ping-pong tables, hurled at us with an energy explosion. Gwyneth Paltrow returning to screens alongside Chalamet, that contrast chemistry is the film's real engine. A chaotic, nostalgic, grimy portrait of an obsessive man chasing a tiny plastic ball. Dakota Johnson, Chris Evans, Pedro Pascal. From the outside, a glamorous New York love triangle. But Celine's song, after the poetic stillness of past lives, turns the wheel sharply, placing love itself on the table as a commodity. A professional matchmaker for Manhattan's wealthiest bachelors finds herself trapped inside the material world she created. Rather than romance through rose-tinted glasses, the film dissects economic calculations and performative sincerity with pitch-black humor, an unsettling relationship anatomy about how loyalty has quietly become a commercial transaction. Eva Victor catches everyone off guard with this debut. Focused on surviving after sexual assault, the film bears no resemblance to the exploitative issue films we're used to. Scenes of laughing until crying immediately followed by silence that drops like ice, that's the film's backbone. Pain and humor placed side by side with panic attacks and everyday absurdity. A raw, unfiltered truth about what it feels like to be at your most wounded, right in your face. We covered 50 A24 films across 2 parts. Defining this studio is still difficult. Horror, drama, sci-fi? No label fits. And that's exactly what makes them special. At ScreenPsyche, we're here every week with new lists and analyses. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.